Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. In this one, my friends, I'm gonna be testing a GeForce RTX 3070 laptop in Stalker 2 lag of Chernobyl. This is the Asus G17 from 2021. It has the RTX 3070 laptop GPU. I'm running it with the latest drivers, of course. It is overclocked because I have the Armory crate set to turbo mode right here to make the CPU frequency go as high as possible with a bit higher power consumption on that CPU, as well as a small overclock to the graphics card. You can see all of the GPU specs right here. In Tech Power-Up's GPU-Z resizable bar is enabled. It's running in PCIe 3.0x8 because this was the norm back in 2021 basically. And I'm also utilizing an external monitor in this test to avoid Nvidia Optimus, by the way. And finally, on the left, you can see the Ryzen 9 5900HX CPU, which is inside of this laptop as well, of course. 8 cores, 16 threads, and 32 gigabytes of DDR4 3200 MHz RAM in dual channel. Let's get into it, shall we? And we're here, let's go over the settings first. I am starting at 1080p resolution, utilizing 90 FOV. That doesn't really affect FPS in this game too much. And I am using the low settings preset here with DLAA, which also doesn't affect FPS too much compared to like TAA or off, for example. We'll also try some DLSS on quality and so on, but for now I'll keep it on DLAA, which is 100% resolution scale, so it's still native, just applies the AA from DLSS, and the rest of the settings are set to low. Let's go ahead and start in the settlement area, which is super demanding. Also guys, yes, the CPU looks like it's frying itself at 95 degrees Celsius. Sometimes it reaches higher than that, 96 and so on, but that's by design for these chips, okay? So no worries. I've been playing on this laptop ever since I bought it back in 2021 or 22, and it's still absolutely fine, as you can see. I've also replaced the thermal paste recently, so it's not that. It's just the turbo mode pushes this CPU to the absolute maximum in this chassis, basically. Let's start counting our FPS. Now, it's stuttering quite a bit here, but that's completely normal. It stutters in every system in this area right here, and it's actually having a CPU bottleneck scenario. You can see the GPU utilization is in the 80% range most of the time. So it's actually, most of the time, it's 70 to 80%, which is very, very interesting. Because, you know, it's a 3070 laptop GPU. It's not as fast as a desktop 3070, obviously, but it's still quite a decent graphics card indeed. And it's a big shame to see it being bottlenecked by a Ryzen 9 5900HX, which was a high-end CPU back when it came out in 2021. So yeah, this is where we stand in terms of performance in Stalker 2, guys. At least it's playable. I honestly thought it was going to get lower FPS, guys, down into like the 20s and 30s most of the time, but no, apparently it's like 40 plus all of the time. The least that it drops to in that settlement area is 40s, so that's decent for the CPU that this has and for the actual horrible optimization of this game. Considering that like my 7800X 3D, for example, is capable of 60 plus, just barely capable of 60 plus all of the time, I expected the 5900HX being a lower power CPU, of course, laptop CPU as well from 4 years ago almost. Yeah, to struggle quite a bit more than it is struggling at the moment, but apparently it is a bit faster than something like a Ryzen 5 3600 in this particular title as well, so it handles its own. Like right here, for example, outside of that settlement area, we are in a GPU bound scenario most of the time with 99% GPU utilization and getting 60s to 70s most of the time. So now we're seeing the limits of that 3070, and we're actually testing the 3070 at the moment, because previously in a CPU bound scenario you're basically testing the CPU. Oh boy, please don't do this to me, don't do this. It's very hard to play with these FPS and stutters. Actually, FPS are fine, but frame time has a lot of micro stuttering issues, unfortunately, which is a big shame, and they should definitely try to fix that. Although ever since the game released, you know, like a month ago almost, yeah, actually a month ago, it hasn't had many improvements. What is going on in terms of FPS, you know, like CPU performance has improved a bit, but not by a large margin, unfortunately. And it needs to improve by a large margin, so people can actually play the game properly. At least it's good to see 64 FPS average there and 1% lows of 36. Still, this is lowest settings possible. Some settings are also CPU intensive, so it will drop if you pair it with like high settings, for example, which was the default for this machine for some reason, probably because it saw the RTX 3070 and it adjusted settings accordingly at 1080p. But yeah, overall, it's not a completely awful experience. Now, we have another trick up our sleeves. We could utilize DLSS, of course, but that wouldn't give us more FPS in the settlement area. By the way, we stopped right here and it's getting 69 FPS. That's amazing. Let's go ahead and try with some frame generation. Yes, I know it doesn't say frame generation anymore. It just says FSR 3.1, which is very weird, but this is the frame generation here. I also recommend you to enable reflex whenever you enable frame generation from AMD, so the input lag gets lower, you know, and it's a little bit more bearable this way, although in this game, input lag is absolutely atrocious, even with reflex enabled. Still, guys, as you can see, we went from 60-ish frames per second into the 100s, which is a heck of a lot better, right? Hell yes. In terms of input lag, it's bearable. It's kind of bad, actually, right now in the settlement area, though, because it's stuttering a lot more, and it's dropping our FPS into the 70s and 80s, and then the input lag starts feeling really, really crappy, honestly. That's Bob over there, by the way. Should we? Maybe later. Okay. But if you want the 60 plus FPS experience all of the time, you will need to enable that frame generation. It's mandatory, basically, if you want a little bit better stability. You know, it's still going to stutter a lot, but at least now it doesn't slow down into the 50s and 40s. But it's up to you. Not a terrible experience as I was expecting, and I think we should move on to medium settings. Now, the jump in visual fidelity from low to medium is actually quite huge in this game, so I hope that we can actually play it on medium settings without a major performance hit, because FPS don't really change by all that much. It's only on the high to ultra that it drops performance by a lot, and look at this. Oh, yes, beautiful, right? I'm gonna restart the game, okay? Okay, here we go. It's definitely getting lower FPS than what we saw at low settings, guys. Yeah, low 40s, mid 40s, so we lost about, what, 5 to 10 FPS coming from low to medium, but I think it's worth it because it looks a lot better now. Now, the main issue that I have with medium settings, and, well, this game in general, is the pop-in. Even on epic settings, there's a ton of pop-in, but on the medium settings, the shadow pop-in is absolutely insane. Look at that over there. It looks terrible. I mean, I don't remember the last time that I saw such terrible-looking shadows, right? And as you can see, if you start walking towards it, things get a little bit better, but even if you're licking the shadows, they're still really low quality, right? Also, if you are running towards the settlement, as soon as you cross this little intersection right here, look at that frame time graph. It just gets wrecked completely. But this happens even on my 7800X 3D system, so, and with a 4090 as well. It's not down to the actual PC itself, it's down to the terrible, awful optimization of this game and the engine as well, and traversal stuttering, so on. It's just, it has a lot of issues, this game. It should have released like in mid-2025 in my opinion, so they could actually figure out a way to make performance better, I guess. But then the new GPUs from Nvidia would come out and I guess they would think, who cares? If you want more performance, just upgrade. But that's not the way to do it, okay? Developers, please. I can't recommend this, though. This is pretty terrible in terms of stability, once again. You should wait. If you have a system like this, a laptop with an RTX 3070, you should wait to buy this game and maybe stick to the older Stalker games for now, okay? Because I believe they will eventually fix a lot of these stuttering issues and terrible optimization issues and so on, but we're not quite there yet, unfortunately. Okay, even with the latest updates, again, it only barely improved things. Oh boy. Oh, okay, there we go. I got him. Also, sorry about the screen tearing. For some reason, this doesn't support G-Sync when connected to my G-Sync monitor through the capture card. So, yeah, we got screen tearing all over the place, unfortunately. I guess the variable refresh rate in this laptop goes through FreeSync, through the integrated graphics, because you can't really disable Optimus. So, yeah, if you are playing in the actual monitor of the laptop, it has FreeSync, but here we don't have anything. Yeah, this way with an external monitor, we can actually show the proper performance of the CPU without being even more bottlenecked from Nvidia Optimus, because that takes away a lot of performance actually in these machines. And unfortunately, since this is one of the early models with RTX 30 series GPUs, yeah, it didn't have a mux switch, so that's a big shame. I regret buying this laptop just because of that sometimes. But then again, I mostly play Manor Lords on it and less intensive titles, so it's fine. Anyway, it's close to 60 on average, but it has a heck of a ton of stuttering, so it makes it not be that amazing. Once again, we saw CPU bottleneck a lot of times here in this system, so using like quality DLSS wouldn't do anything to the average results or the 1% lows. So let's enable frame generation instead and utilize the Nvidia Reflex, which was already enabled. Okay, forgot to disable that at native resolution. But here we go. We're getting 80, still kind of the same thing as we saw at low settings. Once again, maybe a little bit lower, you know, but it's okay. Again, it will improve smoothness, it will add a lot of input lag. In terms of picture quality, it will make some of the trees and some of the effects a little bit blurrier and smudgy, basically. But it's still passable on a 1080p display of a size of a laptop monitor, you know. But here, once again, I wouldn't utilize quality DLSS. Just utilize FG over native and you're gonna see 100-ish FPS. 1% lows are at 69 right now. It's playable of an experience. Once again, a little bit more stable. It doesn't stutter as much in terms of it doesn't have as many spikes, which is great. But again, the big concern here is whether or not you can live with the terrible input lag, which in these cases, like right now, killing these bastards which are running and jumping all over the place, it's a bit harder to aim at them with the input lag, guys. You are going to miss a few more shots than you would without the frame generation enabled. But again, you gain a bit of smoothness, and you know what? Compared to what we saw previously without FG, I think I would actually choose to play with FG. But obviously, when you get to the settlement areas, things will drop a lot. Popping of the trees and so on. It's kind of crazy in this one. Once again, let me eat as well. I eat the dog food. So tasty, right? Look at that. It's opening my appetite. All right, here we go. Entering the settlement, dropping into the 60s and 50s now. And then the input lag starts becoming really terrible as well. Alright, anyway, this is the experience, guys. Goodbye, Bob! I still don't believe these guys start shooting at me whenever I kill Bob. Like, I'm doing them a favor. Nobody likes Bob, you know? Anyway, let's go back to the menu and try high settings. We're at 1080p high, as you can see here with the LEA. And let's load in the same save, play the game again. Oh my, still CPU bound on high settings. Again, some of the settings are actually CPU intensive, so they will drop performance in CPU bound scenarios as well. And, well, it's getting 40-ish frames per second, dropping into the 30s sometimes. If you don't mind drops into the 30s, it might be playable. If you don't mind stuttering issues all over the place, it might be playable. I mind both of those things, so I don't think this is a very playable experience. Even on low settings, once again, it stutters way too much for my taste, and I don't like it. Obviously, you can get higher FPS outside of here. 1% lows are really rough, though. Look at that, 20s. consistently into the 20s, in the settlement at least. Like over here, it should increase a little. But all right, see, the 3070 laptop GPU does have what it takes to play this game on high settings and 1080p resolution, which is nice, you know, but yeah, the CPU is definitely a bottleneck here in those settlement areas, or busier areas, basically. Right now, it's fluctuating a little bit, GPU usage, you know. It's a shame, guys. It is a big shame to see such a big CPU bottleneck in this title with a 5900HX and a laptop GPU. But again, I guess that's what I've been seeing throughout these years, you know. Pretty much like 80% of the games are CPU bound in this system, at least in the actual monitor of the PC, because of Nvidia Optimus and so on. That drops performance by a lot again in CPU bound scenarios mostly. But yeah, this CPU is not as fast as I thought it was back when I bought it, and now it's definitely showing its age, you know. Oh my gosh, lots of jacks here. Why do you do this to me, Jack? Why do you do this? Stop it. Thank you. Okay, we're fine. We're fine. Let's get out of here. 50s with a lot of stuttering still. Ugh. I don't like this. Let's enable FG over DLAA once again. Go back to the settlement area. I think, yeah, people are mad at me in this save game. It's one of the times when I killed Bob. And here we go. This is the experience with frame generation dropping into the 60s very often here. Now into the 70s. GPU usage isn't maxing out. I'm also going to enable reflex here, okay, to make things a little bit more bearable in terms of input lag, although it's only slightly more bearable. It's almost not noticeable. I believe previously it was a bit more noticeable in some previous updates, but now it isn't. But yeah, look at this. 90s, 80s outside. So we lost about 10 frames per second compared to medium settings with frame generation enabled over DLAA. And yeah, it still stutters like crazy when approaching the settlement area. Input lag then becomes absolutely terrible and dreadful. Yeah, it's really bad. Dropping into the 50s even. I guess high is a bit too much, okay, guys? This guy was just loaded in all of a sudden, I think. Drops into the 70s and 60s is very rough with the frame generation enabled. It might still be better than without the frame generation because of all of the stutter that we were seeing then, but I don't know, man. I think I would just avoid the high settings. So I'm going to set it back down to medium, okay? Disable that FG, because I feel like medium is the best way to go with this system. And I'm going to try some 1440p with these settings, because my monitor on the G17 is actually a 1440p display. For that, I will also need to restart the game, so let's do that. And here we have it, going over it again, 1440p. Going to disable reflex now, so we can get a little bit higher GPU usage. And DLAA, no FG, medium settings. Okay, so 3070 laptop GPU still, well, kind of handles it. It's not dropping from 30s, so at least there's that. Medium at 1440p. All right. Not terrible. Obviously, with these baseline FPS and full GPU utilization here at 1440p, it means that if you were to utilize some frame generation, it would be a terrible, terrible experience in terms of input lag. Because you want 60 FPS baseline to utilize frame generation properly without major input lag issues. Previously, at 1080p, we were getting like 60 average on low settings or medium settings sometimes. So enabling FG over that still provided a decent improvement and a playable one, but enabling FG over 40-ish FPS or 30s sometimes, it's a really, really bad experience, guys. Okay, it's going to feel like crap when I do so, but I'll still try it out, okay? Anyway, getting 40s, if it was a flat frame time graph, I would say this was a decent experience, right? Because it's getting 43 FPS average. That's playable in a single-player title, in my opinion. You can get used to it as well, even though it's a shooter game. It's fine, but with all of that micro-stuttering in the frame time graph, it doesn't feel very good. Like, I like to talk about this example a lot in Battlefield games. For some reason, the Frostbite engine works really well with 40 FPS, okay? I can play those games all day long at 40 FPS locked, and they will be playable, they will provide a smooth frame time as well, and responsive as well. It's just, it's another experience, but here in UE5 games, it's so stuttery. It's so inconsistent, the experience, guys. It's just, I don't like it. Now let's try enabling that frame generation, guys. Puts us up into the 70s, but again, 60s and 70s with FG feels really, really bad. So it doesn't really save the 3070 laptop here, guys. Ugh. And I mean, I could utilize like quality DLSS as well. Maybe that's the way to go. Wait a second. Let's try to use quality here. All right, quality DLSS at 1440 with FG. I'm also going to enable the reflex. Okay, now it's closer to 100. So now we're getting similar experience to what we saw at 1080p DLEA with frame generation in terms of FPS and input lag, but it actually looks better because DLSS quality at 1440p does look better on a 1440p display than 1080p native on a 1080p native display as well. So yeah, not bad of an experience. Look at the amount of frame generated weirdness artifacts basically appearing there on the scope. Oh my god, that is terrible. That's some of the worst artifacting that I've seen so far with FG, guys. And it's really noticeable as well. Oh boy. But if you can overlook those issues, and I mean, they don't really happen very often, it's going to be a decent experience. Over here, it drops GPU usage again. It puts us into the 80s again. I mean, it's going to be playable if you can stand the horrible stutter and the horrible input lag as well in the settlement areas. Outside of here with 100 FPS, it's bearable. Here, it's just, to me, it's unbearable, and I wouldn't play like this. But hey, my recommendation is to wait until they actually fix something and they introduce some performance enhancing updates, because they haven't yet. At least it's not really that noticeable. Now I want to disable FG and play with upscaling only. Okay, so DLSS quality, no frame gen, and indeed it drops to the same values as we saw at 1080p resolution basically, because yeah, we get a CPU bottleneck basically all of the time now, aside from outside of here. So this is going to be very, very similar to 1080p high. Super stuttery again, super terrible in terms of stability. Ugh. And obviously, if you get out here, GPU usage goes up to 98%, 97% sometimes, but it still fluctuates a lot because of the stuttering. So it's still not amazing. But you do get 60-ish frames per second, so that is actually decent. Oh my god, stop! These anomalies are everywhere. What the heck? Anyway, I think that's about it for this one, guys. Thanks very much for watching. This was a different look at this game. So far, I've only tested this game on high-end CPUs, like the 7800X 3D or the... actually, that was the only CPU that I tested so far in this game for all of the GPU tests that I've done. And well, this time, unfortunately, this is not a true 3070 laptop GPU test because we were CPU bound a lot of the time. But yeah, it gives us an idea of how a lower end CPU, actually it's a very high end one from 2021, but lower end CPU than 7800X 3D, which I usually test with, does in this particular title. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Love you all. Bye-bye.